Look, parts of it are in Estonian, Russian, and Norwegian, okay? Give me a freaking break. If you're new here, what I was just referring to is the fact that this channel is reviews for non-English language TV shows and movies, mainly European series. So, of course, technically I should not be reviewing Tenet. However, as you have probably worked out, I'm Australian, which means that I have had the opportunity to see this film in the cinema, something that a lot of people, namely Americans, have not yet had. Wherever you are, if that's the situation, I do hope it eases soon for you. However, the main reason that I talk about foreign language material is that not many people watch it, and therefore even fewer people review it. And with Tenet, for the next few days at least, we have a similar situation. At the time of filming this, even Chris Stuckmann has not made a review yet, which is very unusual. And if you're wondering if I'm using the advantage I have in Australia right now to try and get watch time up on my channel, bingo. But to be fair, I did only decide that I would make this review when I saw that it plays out in Russia, Estonia, and my specialty area, Scandinavia, as well as India and Britain. Now that's as close as we're coming to spoilers in this review. Don't worry, I'm very strict about this. There will be no spoilers. But on top of the multinational and partially multilingual nature of Tenet, there are a few reasons that I think I can give this film a fair review. I don't think I need to point out to you that I'm a huge fan of Christopher Nolan, and like I'm sure many of you have, I've been looking forward to this film basically ever since I heard that it was going to happen. So I had always planned to see Tenet at the cinema, and despite having a pretty good home cinema set up myself, I didn't like hearing talk about it being released online. For me, Nolan is just a watch at the cinema kind of director. So I was very grateful that this part of Australia is now considered safe enough that the cinema is open again. And let me tell you guys, if there is a movie you want to see and you can get to a cinema with you know what going on and the enforced social distancing that brings, you go to that cinema. It is flippin' amazing. I booked the first seat in my session, row 8, seat 14 out of 27, the center of the cinema. And legally then, no one is allowed to book a seat within 2 seats of me in any direction. I know it's not cost effective, I know they can't keep this up, but damn, is it a nice way to watch a movie? But what of the movie? I don't think that Christopher Nolan is ever going to allow himself to relax and rest on his laurels. I don't think it's in his nature. For me, he's the best director working today, or at least in the top 5, and in my opinion, in the top 20 of all time. But I doubt that he's ever considered this. I don't think he regularly compares himself to others. I don't think he focuses on anything other than his vision and doing his best work that day. So to the people who critique Tenet by saying that he's lost his touch or he thinks that people just have to see it and like it because it's his movie, I don't think you're getting him right. I think you're attributing a vanity to Nolan that just isn't him. But it's a little bit hard to know what to say about Tenet because it's nowhere near being a properly bad film. To say, oh yeah, Tenet, that rubbish that came out in the second half of 2020, that's just not true. But at the same time, to say that it's the same experience that we've come to expect from Nolan with the last 9 films he's made, that's not really true either. So I will get to the good stuff, but to say what I feel is missing from Tenet, it is the beating heart. It is the reason behind all these crazy action scenes that we're seeing. It's just not strongly established. That's not to say that it's not there. We actually get this told to us very clearly. But the way they tell us is a strange combination of simplistic and convoluted. We get told this so plainly that it's almost like they want you to have a go at it. I can imagine something like pitch meetings making very short work of this film. But then that cause that is given to us so plainly is then moved around and changed and shifted, and we never really get a good grasp of what we're actually fighting for. There's basically just a little too much movie here for the amount of film that they shot it on. I'm thinking of making the thumbnail for this review something about it being too short, and at 2.5 hours that sounds like clickbait, but I'm actually serious. 30 years ago, 2.5 hours was not considered outrageously long for a film. The Godfather trilogy had just finished, Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump are both that long, and the uncut version of Dances with Wolves is 4 hours. And that's just Kevin Costner and Native Americans. None of those films are so ambitious as to redefine how we think about time. Tenet is that ambitious, and it kind of fails, and ironically, because it's a little too short. I realize that I'm probably the exception here, but I also felt that Inception and Interstellar were both missing a couple of scenes. And I don't think that this is entirely Nolan's fault. I'm sure that he is under pressure from the studios, who are probably thinking that in the age of TikTok and YouTube, no one is going to watch a 3.5 hour movie. Now, we can argue all day about whether that's true or not, but I do think that some of his films suffer for being shorter, and I think this is especially the case with Tenet. There just isn't a firm base established here. In theory, we're supposed to want something for a particular character, and that's supposed to drive the plot, and we're supposed to want that person to be okay, but it's very flimsy. If we compare it to, say, Interstellar, we want things for both Murphy and Cooper because we spend 45 minutes getting to know them. They are very much our main characters. But the equivalent character in Tenet, if there is an equivalent character, is basically a random person. And I'm not making that up. I really do mean that they're a rando. But then at the other end of the scale, there comes a point in the film where the stakes are raised. And at this point, they're raised laughably high. So if you didn't appreciate the 4.5 megaton atom bomb from The Dark Knight Rises, then you won't appreciate the stakes discussed in this film because they're just so ridiculously high. Like, think about the dumbest James Bond movie. That's what's kind of going on here. And again, the problem is not necessarily the threat itself, but it's the fact that we don't feel it because we only hear characters discuss it, so we don't get a chance to really perceive this as a threat. So the characters are saying this could happen, and you just kind of think, yeah, okay. Even in The Dark Knight Rises, which is technically a superhero film, there's a lot of energy spent on setting up that whole atom bomb threat. That whole opening scene, the amazing plane crash, it's all part of setting up the atom bomb thing. In Tenet, we're told what could happen and that that would be bad, but even our comprehension of that actually relies on us understanding the kind of science that they're discussing. Which brings me to the huge amounts of exposition. I wasn't bored during this movie. It wasn't what I would describe as boring. But there is a passage probably from about the 10-minute mark through to the 30-minute mark that is almost entirely exposition. And the problem with that is that you just can't remember 20 minutes of spoken information, no matter how hard you try. That's why the rule is show, don't tell. So then we would go into these huge action scenes, and even though I'd been trying to listen to every word because I know that in Nolan films most things are important, we'd go into these immense action scenes that would be really exciting, but I'd be forgetting what they're trying to achieve in the scene. The action is stunning, of course, it's great, but with other Nolan action films, the action is so enjoyable, not just because it's so well directed, even though it is, it's because the stakes are so clearly outlined. It's so clear what the characters have to do and what that will lead to. Whereas in Tenet, it's quite sort of convoluted and you don't really know who's who's trying to do what. It's all a bit messy. When you compare this to, say, Inception, which, yes, okay, it was a slightly confusing film the first time, you still understood that certain things had to happen, and it was very clear as you were following Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character taking the guys into the lift. You're like, come on, man, get them in the lift. It doesn't work like that in Tenet. This is where writing a review for a film like this can get a little bit tricky, because it may, just may, turn out that where Inception and The Prestige and Interstellar were like 2 or 3 steps ahead of most of us, Tenet might be like 50 steps ahead, and it will therefore require like 5 or 6 viewings before anyone actually gets what's really going on at any one moment. So it could be a little bit of a Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy situation. However, just from my sensing on the one view, I don't think that is the case. I think this is more a case of watch it 2 or 3 times, it might get a little bit better, but it still won't entirely make sense. Now, I said no spoilers, so I'll be very deliberate with my choice of words here. If you've seen the preview, you know that there is a certain meddling with the ordinary physical laws of the universe. But at times, it can be extremely difficult to work out what this is doing, who's using it, how it's affecting everything, and therefore what different characters want out of each situation. And this may be one of the spots that Nolan has outwitted us all, because if this is the case, I don't think that anyone could fully perceive what was going on properly in first viewing. Maybe a very smart person could get it in second viewing, but I think most people will take like 4 or 5 viewings to get it. However, from what I can perceive on one viewing, I just don't think that that's what's going on here. I think that it really doesn't all add up. Nolan appears to be fascinated by time, and in particular the non-explored, not yet understood, non-sequential nature of it, a more kind of simultaneous nature that many physicists believe is a thing. Even in his non-sci-fi films, Memento and Insomnia, he plays quite openly with the disorienting nature that time can have on people. And then in Interstellar, he worked with a theoretical physicist to spend basically a whole movie just exploring the strange nature of time. And I share his interest in this. I'm fascinated by time, and particularly this kind of otherworldly stuff. So I'm prepared to accept when a movie says, this is a thing now, this is what humans have discovered, and this is how it works. I'm prepared to accept that more willingly than many people would be. But even I had difficulty accepting some of the assertions that were made in Tenet, not because they're not in line with physics, I wouldn't expect them to be, but because they're given to you and you think, okay, that will be awesome when it plays out, and most of them never really play out, or they play out in about 10 seconds of screen time. And worse than that, sometimes they appear to disobey their own rules. And you think, why did you bother explaining all those rules to me if they weren't going to have an impact on the film? And this comes back to that running time thing. I genuinely think that this could have been either a 3.5-hour movie or maybe a 3-part miniseries, but instead it's stuffed into this feature-length film, and I think it's just a little bit too much for its own running length. So what we get is a film that is on the one hand full of exposition, and on the other leaves itself a lot of explaining to do. Having said all that, a decent amount of this film is action sequences, and these are great. If you're just looking for an action movie, I suppose you could do better than this movie. In 2020, there are action sequences that are probably better than those in Tenet, but these still show the experience of someone who's directed 3 Batmans, Inception, and Dunkirk. The action is just so clean. There's no shaky cam. There's no cheap short takes. It's all long takes and wide shots. Now, you can't always tell why what is going on. That's a different matter. But you can tell what is happening. It's clean and exciting. My favorite sequence was what I'm going to call a car chase. Now, it's not exactly a car chase, but it involves cars. And car chases and car sequences are very hard to do in film, because if you've ever watched Formula One, you know that no matter how fast a car goes, on a screen, it just never looks like it's going fast. So there is a way of doing this right on film, but it's very, very hard to do, and it's very often done wrong. What this film does is not necessarily looking fast. It does look fast, but it's not like outrageous, but it does look very real and it looks dangerous. It would have been a monumental task to film and then to edit these sequences, especially with that added element, the sci-fi one that I mentioned before. I cannot really fault a single shot here. And I think that if Christopher Nolan ever wants to take a break from these kind of mind-bending stories that he's known for, he could make an amazing straight heist film, like, say, The French Connection or The Town, directed by Chris Nolan. I would watch that film. There are quite a few other action sequences that are also good, but I think the cars are the standout. The fight scenes are fine, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're not really amazing. If you really wanted a fight movie, then you would go and see like a martial arts movie, I guess, but there's certainly nothing wrong with them here. But we go to the movies, especially this kind of movie, for escapism. And this movie definitely provides that. For 2.5 hours, I wasn't thinking about work. I wasn't thinking about anything that I normally think about, namely languages, even though I was spotting all the Norwegian and Estonian words in the background. I love that kind of stuff. So from that element, but also from the escapism point of view, I did enjoy this movie. I'm actually going to see this at the cinema again, because I can think of far worse ways to spend 2.5 hours and 18 Australian dollars, and that's more than I can say of a lot of movies. So it is not by a long shot, as I heard one Australian newspaper journalist describe it, a dud. That is not true at all. That is an extremely childish and short-sighted comment, and it's no wonder that the Australian mainstream media is trying to hijack YouTube, because you idiots are just smart enough to realise that it's making you irrelevant. I prefer to be an adult about it, as well as to be respectful to the man who has had probably the best run of 9 films in a row that we've ever seen, if we start it from his second film, Memento, when I say that Tenet is not at the higher end of that catalogue. Batman Begins and Insomnia would probably be my least favourites of that 9 that I'm talking about, and on one watch I would put Tenet somewhere about the same level, which is not to say that it's bad, it's just not Interstellar or The Prestige, but like, how many films are? If I'd gone into the cinema expecting something like The Bourne Identity 5, I'd have been very pleased with the experience. I'd have come out very pleasantly surprised, which is something I can say of the film, say, The Next 3 Days. I didn't expect it to be horrible, but I didn't really expect it to be really good. And it was a lot better than I expected, and as a result, I still like it. Now, Tenet was not as good as I had expected, and that will just require some adjusting. I think on second and third viewing, I will like it a lot more. What I find most disappointing about this is that apparently Nolan has had these ideas swimming around in his head for years, and I don't know when he started working on drafts or anything, but it feels like he was forced to publish a draft rather than a finished product. It surprises me that he considered this script finished enough to start shooting, and it would actually make me happy for once to learn that Warner Brothers had this plan all along to now release a 3-hour Blu-ray in response to everything that's been going on and cinemas being closed, because if that happened, I'd be like, right, well, that's obviously the film that we were supposed to get, because as it stands, the 2.5-hour edition that is in cinemas doesn't feel done. But if your part of the world has a cinema open, and especially if that cinema is enforcing social distancing, you go and see this movie, and you take all the snacks and popcorn that you can get your hands on, because when there's only like 4 other people in the cinema, the sound of Tenet is so freaking loud that you can't even hear yourself chewing. It's an amazing cinema experience. And let's face it, you didn't watch this review to find out whether you should see Tenet. If you're a Nolan fan, you're going to see it. If you're not, you should anyway. And if you've made it this far through the review, you should definitely subscribe. Thank you. Bye.